Hello and welcome everyone, whatever time it is where you are joining across the globe. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Laurie and I will be moderating today's event on behalf of Go Live Serve. Today's event is actually hosted by three organizations: Call to Work, Go Live Serve, and Theology of Work. And this event is part of the Work as Global Local Mission series, which began as an annual conference in the fall of 2020 and has continued through follow-up conferences and webinars. Just so you know, the recordings from our webinar today and all of our events can be found on Go Live Serve's YouTube channel, so please check that out. And I think that, that address will be chatted in the chat box. I'd like to start out today by highlighting some of the questions that brought us to organizing today's specific webinar on the topic of building bridges across faiths at work. So as we've listened to your different feedback from our webinars throughout the last couple of years, we've noticed a lot of you asking about how to share God's love with our neighbors, specifically at work. So sharing Christ at work makes sense because we go to work every day, all of us, and many of our colleagues are not believers. But we may hesitate to share our faith at work. We wonder if people would be offended by talking about religion, or we don't want to be labeled and siloed at work because we are Christians. So we often don't want to debate our Christian beliefs in an already maybe divided cultural environment. So how can we practically love our neighbors and witness for Christ at work? Well, in this webinar, you will hear from two panelists who will equip you to reach out at work, which is where you meet 90% of your non-Christian contacts. We will address some questions such as, how can we be visible about our faith and respectful of other faiths? How do we communicate love to colleagues of diverse cultures, contribute to inclusivity at work, and be a good witness for Christ? Our speakers today are Sue Warnke and Mimi Chan. They are both leaders in their company fellowships at Salesforce and Amazon, respectively. Please do note that the views and opinions of our speakers today are their own and not necessarily that of their employers. They will share how to represent Christ in winsome ways in today's work culture that can often seem hostile to our faith. Hopefully today you will gain confidence as witnesses at work when you learn practical ways to have friendly faith conversations with your colleagues. Also, we hope that you will be better prepared to go on international business trips and when or if God calls you to serve overseas. So during the first part of our time together, Sue Warnke will share her talk. Then we will have Mimi respond, and followed by a live Q&A. So you may have noticed you are on Zoom webinar, which is kind of like Zoom, but different. So for the Q&A, please do type in your questions on the Q&A box throughout the webinar as the speakers are talking. And then what we will do is I will choose from those questions to ask them during the live Q&A. You will also see a thumbs up or upvote there, that function. You can tap that and then you can rate the questions that you want to hear, and I will see those as well. So without further ado, let's get started with our first panelist for today, Sue Warnke. Sue Warnke, just to introduce her a little bit, she has over 20 years of experience in the software industry. Currently, she is the Senior Director of Content Experience at Salesforce. And after a lifetime as an agnostic, Sue actually began to follow Jesus about 5 years ago. Since then, she's done a lot. She helped start FaithForce, which is Salesforce faith-based employee resource group. And that has actually sparked a movement of authentic faith in the workplace. She also speaks around the country about the integration of faith and work, and she shares a lot of best practices on her blog. I encourage you to take a look at it. It's leanership.org. All right, Sue, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's a great honor to be here. And I'm excited to dig in and start talking about some of those hard questions about not just, why we do what we do, but how can we do this in a practical way? How can we reflect Jesus in a practical way? As Lori mentioned, I, to my surprise, converted to Christianity about 5 years ago after a lifetime as an agnostic. That's because I grew up in a very religious environment in Utah, and we were not religious. I didn't grow up religious. And in many ways, I was the target of evangelism and an outsider. So I was very anti-religion, wanted nothing to do with it. But life, has a way of changing your mind. So about 5 years ago, I converted and faith became incredibly important to me. And here I was in this enormous organization wondering, one, how do I live this new faith when nobody knew me as that? And then how do I live it out as well in this real world environment? So I've started to gather lots of different tips and share those out. So this is one of those. And this is, I've talked before about how to have respectful faith conversations. And there's kind of multiple steps to that. And that's on my blog and even in past recordings for this organization. So you can look that up for details. But what we're going to talk about today is a little bit more, how do you reach specifically across multiple faith lines? So we know that the great commandment is to love God and love your neighbor. And we want to do that. And we spend a lot of time doing that. Loving God is pretty easy once you get to know God. And loving your neighbor, it depends who you're around. Many times we're around other Christians. And so the commandment becomes love God and love other Christians, which of course is not the actual commandment. So, we really want to live that out. How do we love God and love our neighbors when so many are of different beliefs? We want to do that sensitively and inclusively. According to Pew and Gallup, 70% of the world's population is not Christian. And that's who, we want to help and love. It's not so much, it's nice to get encouragement from our Christian brothers and sisters, but really our purpose is to go out, right, and make fruit. And that's the Great Commission, and is, not just love God and love your neighbor, but go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Well, that sounds good. We agree with it, but the how is really hard. And especially in this environment for various reasons, we want to not be pushy. We want to be inclusive. And specifically when it comes to other faiths, we worry, well, if I go support this other faith, say holiday, am I endorsing that? If I'm in a room where other prayers are happening, does that mean I'm praying to that God? I'm worshiping that God? There's a lot of confusion. And so the tips that I've gathered here specifically for kind of reflecting the love of Jesus in a multiple faith environment, I think in no way violate, our love of God and our respect for God in our life. So we all want to do that, and we want to do that in this real world. So the question is, what if practicing our faith could be less about our needs and more about understanding the needs of others? These tips are really about the other person. How can we love another person in this multiple faith environment, thereby reflecting Jesus, hopefully, so that others can get a taste of Jesus, can see and feel and hear what Jesus actually looks like, which is perhaps different than the image that people get of Christians in news or in media. What is he actually like? How can we reflect that to a multi-faith environment? So we're going to go over 7 different tips, and these may or may not be relevant to your specific environment. I want to acknowledge that I know we have participants from all around the world. Not all are in a work environment day in, day out. Many of you probably are working remotely. Many of you might be in a ministry environment. So some of these will apply more than others to you, but hopefully you can find 1 or 2 that you could take action on. And at the end, we'll show a list of them, so you don't have to remember them. But if you do have pen and paper, you can actually write down 1 or 2 that seem to resonate with you. So the first one is to acknowledge holidays, not just Christian holidays, but all holidays. So if you're in a working environment, you may have members of your team or colleagues that are following a different faith, and they're following holidays that are very, very important to them. And it's very lovely for them to get a little ping saying Happy Sukkot, Happy Eid. That might be a really good reflection. They might think, wow, especially if you have outed yourself, I would say, in some way as a Christian, where you're not hiding it and it's not pushy, but it's not hidden. And they think, wow, that's surprising. I didn't expect that person to reach out and say happy Eid. Or even a second question, how do you celebrate? Wouldn't that be nice to get a ping like that? What if you got a ping from a Sikh or Muslim and said, Happy Easter, how are you celebrating? Wouldn't that be a lovely expression? I have a story of there was an employee at Salesforce who was looking very tired. And his manager said, what's going on? Are you okay? And he looked down and he mumbled under his breath, I'm fasting for Ramadan. And the manager said something very important, which was, oh, tell me more about that. And that was the first time anybody had asked or shown interest in this thing that he thought he had to hide. And he said, well, fasting sun up to sundown for the purpose of gaining compassion for those in need, which really blew away this manager. And he said something even more important, which was, how can I support you? This employee had never heard anything like that and really felt seen for the first time at work. What if we could do that? An interesting tidbit is that manager was not Christian. So in some ways, non-Christians in certain situations might be even showing more love than the Christians are showing. How could we, at minimum, acknowledge and see and honor the people around us? That, to me, is an expression of Jesus. It is loving our neighbors. And it's not saying that is what I endorse. It's just being interested and listening and trying to learn. So that's one, to acknowledge holidays. And to do that, you have to learn the holidays. Our company comes out with a holiday list, so it's easy for managers to see what's coming. And you can work around that, right? It might not be very sensitive to hold a big team picnic during Ramadan, for example. And if you accidentally do, to at least acknowledge that and say, I just want to apologize because I learned today that it was a major Jewish holiday, Sukkot, and I would have worked around that. I'll work on that. Those things can be very surprising to people and very meaningful and loving. In terms of how to have actual faith conversations, we shy away from that a lot. And as I said, I have step-by-step guidelines on how to do that. But at minimum, just tell yourself it is okay to actually talk about the topic of faith. Now, you might be saying it isn't in my environment, and I respect that. I don't know everybody's situation. In some cases, it's even almost forbidden or illegal. Or punishable if you even mention faith. So if that's the case, I trust that. I trust that. But in most cases, you actually are. We've all been in situations, whether it's in an Uber or in the kitchen or at a coffee shop, where it comes up somehow. Someone's going through something hard, and how do you deal with it? Well, I pray. Things do come up. It should be a natural conversation. You shouldn't go out of your way or start something when someone hasn't initiated. But when you're in that environment, don't be afraid to ask. If you know somebody is wearing a turban, you often can say in an Uber, can I ask, are you Sikh? I've always wanted to learn more about that. Can you tell me why, more about the color of the turbans? Like, I've done that and people love it. They feel like, wow, nobody ever asks me that, and they're thrilled to share. I mean, the vast majority of responses you get are going to be really happy and grateful. If a sort of angry faith conversation comes up, or perhaps you're talking to an atheist, you can actually say, what are some misconceptions that you think people have about atheists? Nobody ever asks them that. Nobody asked me that when I grew up agnostic. I had real reasons for being agnostic. I had experienced a lot of negative things, and it would have been really nice if some people in this religious community had asked me, why are you agnostic? Why? That would be great, instead of sort of assuming or judging or keeping their distance. So it is okay to talk about faith in most situations if it's out of curiosity, authentic curiosity. What's your faith background? How did you grow up? Those are almost always really welcome questions. So we talked about acknowledging holidays and asking direct questions about faith when it comes up naturally from a place of curiosity. Another thing you can do is partner on an outreach event, a volunteering event. That's almost always welcome. Most companies even give you volunteering hours to go out, and most of them are okay with different kind of ministry opportunities. So one thing you could do is partner with a local church for a ministry that is not that is inclusive to different people volunteering. I used to organize huge volunteer events down in San Francisco, which is near where I live. that needs a lot of help and outreach, and there's a lot of people experiencing homelessness, and we would go serve meals to people all over in they're single residency units in real hardship. And I would have hundreds of volunteers from all different faith backgrounds, and they would get to witness, in my view, what Jesus looked, acted, and sounded like firsthand, the love of Jesus helping people. And I remember I was walking the person in my little subgroup. One man was a Hindu, and he was just really blown away by this volunteer activity. And he said, "Why did you organize this?" And I said, "Well, I became a Christian, and I just really want to live out, what Jesus was like." And he was fascinated. And then he asked me, "Well, I saw you praying, how did you do that? Can you teach me how to pray?" So you can imagine it was this just enlightening, amazing, out of the blue conversation that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't seen Jesus, if he hadn't seen what Christianity really is like and looks like and sounds like, not maybe what the media portrays it as. So create those opportunities if you can. If there is an opportunity to do a volunteering event, that's a great way to do it. Another one is, so we've talked about acknowledging holidays, being courageous to ask direct questions about faith, partnering on a volunteer event, and maybe there's an opportunity at your work to have panels where different people can share their stories. We have that because of Salesforce, but even if we didn't, we would have equality events, diversity and equality events, and more companies are opening up to the idea of acknowledging the importance of faith, especially when it's not just Christians. If they're talking about, there's a lot of misconceptions about Sikhism, about Islam, about, and Christians and others, and atheism, add atheism in there because they do experience misconceptions. They do want to talk about that more and more. If you approach it sensitively and inclusively, have a panel event where people can share their stories and listen and acknowledge that. We did one of those, and a sick man told a story about how he was at an airport and he got stopped because of his turban, and his 4-year-old daughter watched this. And it was the first time she associated something negative with something she had thought was very beautiful and positive, the turban. And so it was heartbreaking for him. And it was really important to give him that space and to honor that experience and love him in that moment and not, stereotype or anything like that. So that was if you have an opportunity, you can do that in a church. I wish churches did this more, is invited your neighboring mosque leaders. If you have, depends on where you're at. Here in the Bay Area, it's very diverse. We have mosques and synagogues, and wouldn't that be neat if your church hosted a panel event, to learn what is your experience as a Jewish community in this environment? How are you doing? I mean, wouldn't that be great? We can do that in the workplace, and I think we can do it outside of the workplace as well, just to learn and love. Again, you're not talking about theology. You're not comparing the Quran and the Bible. You're simply honoring somebody's life, a human being, a community, and listening to them and saying, wow, that I didn't know that. That sounds hard. Thank you for sharing. It's honoring, it's loving. And through that, they see Jesus. Through that, they see that's not what I thought Christians were like. This person is loving me and listening to me and caring about me. And that's maybe not the stereotype. So that's a great way that you can do that. So invite people to share their stories. Another one is, world tragedies happen all the time, attacks on specific groups of faith. And imagine that your colleague is one of those members of that environment, that group. So we know about lots of different attacks. So in 2019, there was the Easter massacre in Sri Lanka, where 269 Christians mostly died. That same year, there was the attack in Christchurch, New Zealand, where 51 Muslims died. And in 2018, in Pittsburgh, the Tree of Life Synagogue was attacked and 11 died. So imagine after Christchurch, you're a Muslim employee and you come into work and you've just seen this atrocious situation on the news, and your work says nothing and your colleagues say nothing. And this is devastating to you. How would you feel? We ended up in my company hosting a vigil. We started with after the Pittsburgh attack in Pittsburgh in the Tree of Life Synagogue, And we had a vigil, and, we had a religious leader come, and we lit candles for the victims, and we learned about Jewish mourning ceremonies, and it was very beautiful, and it wasn't political, and it wasn't divisive. It was really honoring. And after that, we started doing the same after other attacks. So we had a really incredible vigil after the Christchurch attacks, and the entire Muslim community came out. We had viewing parties all over the world. We had an imam come in and talk about mourning rituals, and tears, you can imagine, everywhere. And some Muslim employees at Salesforce posted about that on their LinkedIn. So this was a transformational event. They've never felt more seen and loved. And it was co-hosted by many different faiths, and other companies, other people, Muslims at other companies saw those posts. And one woman reached out to me because my name was listed on the blog. And she said, I know you don't know me, but I heard about this vigil. And I just, I came to work, and my company said nothing. And I'd never felt so invisible. And just to know that you helped in some way is groundbreaking. So it can, it's so easy in a way to acknowledge something. You can put a tweet out on your, your social media, like, I stand in solidarity with the victims of various attacks. It doesn't have to be just Christians, Christian attacks, but you could actually do that for a variety of faith backgrounds, but not for show. It needs to be authentic, and you need to truly care. Along those lines, an interesting thing happened after the Sri Lanka Easter bombings, where Christians died. A Muslim colleague of mine pinged me on our social media, and he said, "Sue, what time do churches meet?" And I was sort of taken aback by that, because I thought, well, churches don't really have a set time. That's not how it works. But he didn't know that. And I said, well, it varies, but usually there's a 10 or an 11 o'clock session. I said, why? And he said, well, I wanted to bring flowers to my local church to acknowledge the Christians that were killed in Sri Lanka. And I just almost wanted to cry, because I thought, wow, did churches do that? Did churches think to send flowers to a local mosque after the Christchurch attacks? Maybe they did. I know some did, but churches can do more to reach out. Maybe you have your entire church write cards to victims of those attacks, or send a card to your local mosque, your neighboring mosques, and say, we love you, and I'm so sorry your community is grieving, and we're here for you if you need anything. Like, what if you could do that? I think we can. And then just the last thing is just to be aware of our language, right? I know we often do say believers and non-believers, but to other religions, they also think of themselves as believers. And so it can kind of close the door if we use that language in front of anybody else, or lost, right? People of other faiths certainly don't feel that they are lost. And I know that language is what turned me off in many ways from faith. So we can recap now. And as we recap, and they'll pull up a slide here to show these 7 different points, so you don't have to remember them. And I have a picture there on the right of the first vigil that my company ever had. And it was after the Tree of Life synagogue attack. And you can see it was just beautiful. And then on the right here was the volunteer event, where we had different faiths come and help us out. So one was to acknowledge holidays of other people's faiths. It can be really light and simple, and just ping somebody, happy Eid. Another one is to be courageous to ask direct questions about faith from a place of curiosity when it arises naturally. Don't shy from that. Partner on a volunteer event if you can. Invite other people to share their beliefs on like a panel, or more, not their beliefs so much as their experience in that community. Another one is to send support after a tragedy, ping somebody and say, I know this happened, and I know that you are Muslim, and I just want to let you know that I care about you, and I want to know how you're doing. Host it if you're in a situation at a company where you could host an actual vigil or learn about more of this in an event-based situation, you could do that. And then just be careful of the language. So with that, I want you to think about kind of what stands out to you. And the big thing is don't put too much pressure on yourself. I think sometimes we are very hard on ourselves. Like, I should be doing more. I'm not, living out the great commandment enough. I think we could go baby steps. And I think we need to lay off of ourselves a little bit. It's a really hard environment. And anything that you do that is reflective of Jesus, but not just his words, but his entire being, is a really great thing. And God will bless that. He'll bless those attempts. And the attempts are hard and you might stumble. And that's okay. It's really all about taking one baby step, not about doing all 7 of these and doing them perfectly and having a transformational 1,000-person event. It's about having the courage to try one thing and forgive yourself if that one thing doesn't go smoothly, if it turns somebody off, or if you get in trouble because you just forgot to include somebody or talk to somebody in the right way. It's, you're trying, and be very, very graceful with yourself. And that's what I wanted to share. So kind of just to recap the main point, what if practicing our faith could be less about our needs and more about understanding the needs of others? And here is the next, you can go to the next slide if you want to read more about this. I have a full blog on this topic, as well as those 7 steps to having respectful faith conversations, and a whole playbook on being a Christian in the real world. So that's at my site, and everybody can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to make a bunch of friends here after this meeting. And with that, I will hand it back. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Sue. That was fantastic. I have a lot of my own notes and thoughts, so it was very encouraging. I think, as you put up that last slide with the 7 different things you can do, one thing that was highlighted to me is that can seem overwhelming, right? There's 7 different ones. And I love how you said baby steps, right? Don't feel like you have to do all 7 of these tomorrow at work. I think something with that's important to take the pressure off is take that to God in prayer. Take that list of 7 things and say, God, is there anything that you are highlighting to me, or anything that you're asking me to take a tiny baby step into? It's not a pressure on ourselves. It's like, God, what are you doing in my specific workplace? With that, I love how you were talking about approaching conversations and relationships with love and honoring other people with authentic curiosity, as I think the phrase you used, authentic curiosity. It's such a beautiful picture of the way that Jesus approached people. He honored people, he listened to them. It's very different than being defensive or combative. I think sometimes we think when we talk about our faith, we have to feel like, I have to be defensive or combative. But I think that approach of authentic curiosity, I love that. Could you share a little bit about how you recommend we come to that place in our spirits? Like, should we examine our spirits beforehand to see if we're being authentic and curious, or if we're being combative? Or is there a way that you've experienced to kind of make sure you're coming from that place? Or what has that been like for you?
Oh, that's such a good question, right? Because before we can move into execution of any of these, we have to get our mindset correct, right? I think because I was almost the recipient of some of the negative ways that faith plays out, I already had that mindset of, I don't want to be like that. How can I be a Christian and not be like some of the examples that pushed me away? And so that has been a dominating force for me. I think examine the results, the fruit. Examine the fruit of what your past attempts have resulted in. If you sense people are kind of pulling back as you attempt to live out your faith, it may not be the right strategy. It might need to be softened a little bit and reflect back. It just simply works better to come at it from a place of, it's sort of like pull versus push. So I think of like major companies, Lululemon, Costco. There's a few companies that spend almost zero money on marketing, and that's because their products are so good, people come to them. Be that. Don't be a marketer of Jesus.
I love that. Yep.
Be the product of Jesus. Act and reflect, and people will be drawn to that.
I love that. Be the Trader Joe's of Jesus.
Yes.
I love that. That's great. That's fantastic. Well, thank you, Sue. We will come back to you in a little bit with the Q&A. Remember that you can type in Q&A to the box there on your screen, and we'll come back to those after Mimi's talk in a moment. All right, with that, let's move on, and we're going to welcome Mimi Chan. So Mimi found her passion creating award-winning marketing programs at Fortune 500 companies for the last 20 years. She studied at Stanford University and currently heads seasonal events at Amazon Books. She co-founded Christians at Amazon in 2019. And since then, it's grown from a 10-person weekly prayer meeting to a community of over 1,000 employees and 12 chapters. So she has a lot of good stories for us today. She is on the advisory board of Faith and Work Movement, which is a nonprofit organization that helps a worldwide network of individuals, fellowships, and employee resource groups to positively impact the companies they work for. She volunteers her time to help organize events and train with Pray for Tech and Love at Work. So welcome, Mimi Chan.
Thanks so much for the warm welcome, Lori. It's really fun to talk about these topics for me and to hear some of the advice that Sue has. I'm like myself just writing them down thinking, okay, I need to use that. Today I'm here to talk about how God's really used me to share about my faith at work, but really to share with you all how he's done that in general, what I've seen from other people and how they've gotten to a point where they felt comfortable in whatever belief that they have. And in bringing that full part of themselves to the workplace. And so I reflected a little bit on why I feel so open about sharing what I believe. And from early on in my career, when I think about it, I credit that feeling of comfortability and safety about talking about my faith to really my first job out of college. And I just remember one particular teammate who invited me to church within weeks of getting to know me. And what she did was she normalized talking about her belief at work in such a way that for the rest of my career, I didn't have a lot of fear about talking about what I believed. That being said, I've also experienced, though, that the more your career advances, the harder it is to talk about your faith. You get more worried about, company policies and when it's okay to talk about people who work for you or so forth about your faith. So I find that if you've been open sooner and earlier in your career, the easier it is to continue talking about your faith, no matter how far your career advances. And so I'm hoping that everyone will walk away feeling like they can do the same and feel the same in their workplace. At work, every week, at least one person tells me that I thought I was the only one of my kind. That was literally what one gentleman told me just this week. I thought I was the only one of my kind, meaning I thought I was the only one who believed this, whether it's Christianity or another religion. I took a survey earlier this year of those in our group, those 1,000 Christians in our group, and asked how many of them feel comfortable being Christian at work. And about 75% felt that they could be openly Christian at work, but only 55% have actually shared about their faith. When that explains why only about 48% of them actually knew someone else at work who believed in Jesus. And so that's of a survey of people who already have stepped up and said, oh, I'm Christian. So imagine how much even smaller that group is across the entire company, across your entire companies. Yet when somebody knows that there's somebody else who believes, something similar, when they know someone else's, beliefs in general, it's so good for them to know that they're not the only one who has strong faith beliefs, that they're not the only one that believes this particular thing. There's two main ways that people tell me they learn about someone's religious beliefs. And both require transparency, like Sue talked about, and openness and a willingness to talk about someone else or your own faith. One way that people find out about someone else's beliefs is they say that, or they tell me that there's something that clued them in, something that person wasn't telling them directly or in any way, being like forceful really about it. It's really these kind of silent, really easy, comfortable ways that I think anyone can do. So for instance, at our company, we have a phone directory where you can talk about different communities you're on with like a little badge. And we have a Christian community badge that you can openly add to your profile. About a fourth of the people who discover our group tell me that they find it just through this one open but quiet way that people tell what they believe. Also, this week, my boss sent out an office email letting people know that he's taking the day off for Rosh Hashanah. And that opened a door to talk about faith. It wasn't his intention to talk about faith, it just was, but he was really clear about why he was taking the day off. So, these really, again, like open ways that you can be transparent without being pushy has been some of the easiest and best ways for people to find about faith and to feel comfortable talking about it. You're basically creating a safe space and signaling to people that you're open to talking, right? Which brings me really the most effective way that when I ask people, like, how did you become a Christian? Or how did you find out about our group? Or how do you know what that person believes? Whatever faith belief it is, the most effective way is still one on one. When I asked of our largest faith communities, our chapters, how they grew so large, it always came back to someone asked me to join, someone talked to me, someone took the time to get to know me. It's like that coworker that I first knew, that first job out of college. She was just open to talking. And again, the idea is that we want to create a safe space where people can share who they are and where you yourself could feel comfortable sharing. And it may mean that you take the first step of vulnerability about your life and also the vulnerability of being curious about someone else's life in the way that Sue described. Um, when you do that, what I found is that most people feel the same way, that they want to open up about those parts of their life, but they just didn't feel comfortable doing so. But when you create that psychological safety, then over time, I found that personally, many times now, I'm not the one to initiate the faith conversations, but because I've been so open about the fact that I am Christian, people actually come to me asking about my faith and why do I believe what I believe. And how is that possible, in such a secular workplace that you can be so open about your faith? And it leads to some really great and interesting conversations. It doesn't always mean that the other person wants to become a Christian, but it means that now there's more of an openness to learning like who Christians are and hopefully a more positive perceptions of Christians. And maybe sometime down the line, an openness to considering Christianity. Um, in terms of being a strong Christian at work, I know this is really hard. And one of the hardest things that people talk to me about, there's a woman that I know who is a strong Christian at work, and she's really, really torn about whether she should stay at work at our company. Um, I found that this is one of the biggest, I think, tensions that strong believers of any faith has is, you know, am I better staying here when I feel like my main purpose in life for my friend, for instance, is to share about Jesus? So in her mind, to a way that you're supposed to be doing that is to go into full-time missions, is to leave your work and then spend all your time talking about Jesus. But as Lori mentioned, the workplace is actually where we meet 90% of all our non-Christian contacts. Where else are you going to have such a great opportunity or so many opportunities to talk about what you believe to someone who doesn't know about Jesus? A recent survey found that of over 30% of those in full-time ministry over the course of COVID are actually thinking about leaving full-time ministry. So where people in the workplace are thinking, oh, I need to go out there, to full-time ministry. Full-time ministry people are actually leaving that space for various reasons. And at first, this may sound maybe like disastrous, but in actuality, in my experience, as a worker in the faith worker in a secular world, this has actually been an amazing opportunity in the secular workplace. Every week, someone reaches out to me who's joined my company and they ask, how can they become more involved? I'm a Christian. And what I find out is that they are pastors, they went to seminary, they were in some form of ministry already. God is actually sending missionaries into the workplace where he's closing one door, he's opening another. And I truly believe that part of the reason is because in the workplace, we have access to people and places we can never go to outside of work. There are countries that are closed to missionaries, but that really welcome foreign national workers. And they're not asking what you believe, and yet you bring your belief with you. Um, there's an example that Kelly shared about somebody who was trying so hard to hold an entrepreneurship seminar, and they couldn't get anyone to really join. They couldn't get interest from people in their Christian-based entrepreneurship seminar. But because he then shared about wanting to hold this seminar to help people, with a coworker who, was not a Christian, was actually someone that was more of the local belief, that person got so excited. That person was the one who shared about it, and then they ended up having more people than they could handle in that seminar that they did. And so you see, it opens up the door, gives you like a validity to be able to share about things and to engage people in a way that where the doors would be closed otherwise. And so, um, while 99% of people who don't who follow non-Christian belief systems are scattered across the globe, some of these people can only be reached by you going out in a work contest, as work as missions, or in other cases, in many cases for us, those people actually come to us, where people around the world are coming to the US to study, to work as in big corporations, and when we share our beliefs, it goes back with them. And so, those are some of the things that I've been experiencing in my workplace about how God is moving, how your neighbor in your next cubicle can really be the most important mission field that you have, and ways in which I've seen it work, as well as some of the challenges that you might feel as Christians. Please know that you're not alone in that. Um, Again, like that person this week who told me I thought I was alone. In reality, you're not alone. Many people are also struggling with the same thing you are in terms of how you share your beliefs. And I think the more vulnerable that I've found that people are, then the more those doors open, for all different kinds of beliefs to share and to learn and to be curious about each other.
Thank you very much, Mimi. I really appreciate how you are able to share so many real life examples, and what a blessing you are to so many people who may be feeling like alienated in the workplace, or they thought they were alone. What a blessing to be able to reach out to you. I love that, that Jesus has put on your heart to be in that role. That's fantastic. Having started this faith group at your work, what advice do you have for people who are looking to do the same? At a larger organization, it may look like an ERG, an employee resource group. At a smaller organization, it may look like a weekday morning coffee before work or something, depending on where you're at. What is your advice for someone?
Yeah, I would say that there's two or three things. One, a lot of how we've started our group was really grounded in prayer. As a matter of fact, we started as a small 10-person prayer group. And so praying about the people in your workplace, praying for specific colleagues, praying for God to open that door for you to talk with them is one of the most important things that you can do, one of the most powerful things actually that you can do. And then it's taking some of those steps that Sue talked about in terms of being curious about people, just getting to know people one-on-one. And when you do that, those conversations inevitably will come up. If you're open to it, if you're asking those questions, then the opportunity will open. And then once you've gotten a sense of, like, once you've connected with probably at least like one or two other people in your workplace and realize like, oh, you're a Christian too. I can almost promise you, just statistically speaking, there's at least one or two other Christians in your workplace.
Yeah.
Then you can start praying together. And that's what we did. In our group of 10 people, we started praying. And then God told us, led us to think about, okay, well, how do we grow what's happening here? This has been so wonderful and impactful and helpful to us to have a group to pray with. How do we multiply that impact? And so then we started to form ways of doing that. We created, a group. We started to talk about, share about it. We created materials like that community badge that we talked about. And we just basically grew it from there. And it came down to those, opening those channels so that people could find us, and then also then actively reaching out one-on-one. And from there, it just kept growing on its own. And I mean, God gets the credit for how he did it, because every day people come to me that I'm like, I was like, how did you find us? And it's through all different kinds of ways that like I didn't even plan for. And so I just like leave the rest of it to him. as long as I like follow those few things, I pray, I make sure that like I'm stay curious and I'm talking to people one-on-one. And then we start like putting some of those building blocks in place of systems or channels for communication or things that people can use practically to share about their faith, like things like this webinar. Then it just keeps going from there, is what I found.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. We are going to continue having some questions. We're going to move to the formal Q&A portion of our webinar. So again, there's a Q&A box that should pop up on your screen. Please type your questions in there. And there were also a lot of great questions that some of you submitted in your registration. So I'm going to be pulling from that as well. So the first question I would like to ask is actually one that came in from the registrations. How do you go about balancing doing your actual job at work, your actual role, as well as leading some of these groups and being more involved in a faith group and this type of ministry in the workplace? So how do you balance that?
I can jump in. So I've varied. So I've been really involved in this for those 5 years since I became a Christian. And the first 3 years, heavily involved. I helped start Faith Force. God opened my calendar to do that. I feel like was part of the team that started that, as well as Christians at Salesforce. My calendar opened up because God allowed that, and really blessed my steps of courage, I think. So I had more time when I needed more time. Now these groups are up and running with lots of leaders all over the place. And it's been really clear, like, okay, you can step back now. And so right now I'm focused on primarily my day job, which is running documentation for artificial intelligence. And it takes a lot of my time, but really every day is still ministry. And I still participate in these things. But, people like me, people will come to me out of the blue. Can I set up 15 minutes? I have a problem, someone I used to manage or whatever. And it's because of that sort of foundation, or people I don't even know, right? Someone referred me and I just need to talk. So it is ministry in the real world. It might not be, I don't do the big events anymore because other people have stepped up to lead that. And it's my job to step back. But we can do it every single day by giving our time, or even just complimenting somebody. I really feel like that is such a missed opportunity. You watched a presentation, somebody clearly, was a little nervous, but did it anyway, and ping them and say, wow, you did this specific thing really well. Nobody does that. Such an easy way to be Jesus every single day.
Sounds like it's really about integration rather than like making it a separate project.
I mean, it depends. For a time, it was a completely separate project, and I somehow had 20% of my time allocated, available right when I needed it. And I put, a little extra on the side, but I think God will work that out.
Yeah, that's great. How about you, Mary?
Yeah, I agree with Sue that I find that the part, like if I were to count up all my hours that I spend at work, it is probably something like 20 or 25% of my time I do spend on this part of what I do. And it is like throughout the day. So I schedule it just like I would anything else that is important to me and I want to make a priority. I put time on the calendar, whether it's a meeting or time to like work on something. But I have, very frankly, up early on, or as our group grew, I did find that I had to make some hard choices. I had to give up some other things so that I could focus on this. And a lot of times those hard choices wasn't what about giving up on other things I did at work, because I believe that like doing your work to the greatest excellence that you can to God is what kind of opens the door for you to be able to talk about your faith, right? That way you work is itself a testimony. So it wasn't sacrificing anything I did at work, but I found that I had to make hard choices about time that I would have spent on things outside of work, that I took that time and I devoted it to this at work. I treated that as like people have, hobbies or ways in which they're serving outside of work. I took that time and I made it into serving inside of work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we have another question coming in asking about how to kind of out your faith, especially in the example of maybe someone who's more introverted just in all of their interactions, and they've maybe been at their company for a while now and they haven't taken that step, and they feel kind of more and more like, oh, I should have said
Harder.
something sooner.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for someone in that situation?
Do you want to go first, Mimi?
Sure. I was looking at that question and thinking about that one. Um, it comes out a lot. I actually remember a friend of mine at work, the way she outed herself was that she said, "I'm leaving to go into full-time missions." I'm like, I wish you had told me that earlier. Oh my goodness. Hopefully that's not the way. Hopefully you stay in your workplace. I think God probably needs a lot of you there. But uh, I really believe it's just any one of the steps that Sue shared earlier about being curious. I don't think it actually even needs to be about you talking about your faith first. It can be you asking about someone else first.
Mm.
And I think that naturally, many times that person will then ask about you and what you believe in turn. And so I love that, the fact that it doesn't have to be about you outing yourself. It could be you being curious, and then it doesn't become like you're pushing on someone, but they will actually pull it out of you. um, and then the other thing is that, again, there are ways that you can do it that are transparent without you having to say something that might feel more comfortable for an introvert. Whether it's, like for some people it's openly wearing a cross, for other people it's, in some description of bio when they get introduced, putting in there just a little bit like, I'd like to volunteer at my church.
Mm.
It can be when someone asks, "What are you all doing this weekend?" "Oh, I'm hanging out with friends from church." So it can be really, really small and casual. Like that's how I would recommend starting. It's just like those easy, low risk ways that feel like you would naturally talk about anything else. Think about like when would you talk about your dog, or when would you talk about your family? Like what questions come out that you would talk about that? Can would it also feel like, oh, could I naturally talk about what I believe in this very normal kind of way? See, what are you gonna say?
Yeah, that's fantastic.
No, I
Thank you.
echo that completely. As small as possible. Even like if you are going to ask, about somebody else's faith, you could say, "Well, I'm a Christian, but I'm really curious about your background, your faith background." So you get it out of the way, Um, like all things, you might stumble, but just any way to do this is okay. Make it as small as possible in the same way you would talk about a member of your family.
It seems much less intimidating that way. That's great. I have another question for you, Sue, and actually for both of you as well, but this one's addressed first to Sue. It says, "You're so brave." And then asking for both of you, have you been attacked for being a Christian, or have you felt maybe attacked, or have someone on the offense for you being a Christian at work? And how did you handle that situation? What did that look like?
Yeah, this is a really important topic. And I would say yes, absolutely. And I'll be vague. I mean, I would say at any part of my life since I've become a Christian, I've been attacked or mocked or something along those lines, certainly. Two things. One is it can be an opportunity for a conversation. If somebody erupts and says something or posts something, you could attempt that, follow God here entirely. This is delicate territory. It could be, I heard you say this, can we talk? And hopefully that person would be able to talk it through with you. And sometimes that could be a really, really rich discussion that usually leads to understanding that that person has been hurt by religion in some way and misunderstood you. And, it could be a really rich conversation. There are times when it just frankly crosses the line though. And I think it behooves everybody to learn your policies of whatever environment that you're in. There are inclusive policies, and those do apply to people of faith. So if somebody is crossing the line and it's becoming belittling or harassment or anything like that, that is really important to escalate in the right way with your HR, with your manager, not taking that into your own hands if it truly is an example of harassment. There are absolutely channels in every possible forum, usually for handling that, and it's more of a legalistic situation. So trust the resources available to you, but do learn, what are my rights? What are the policies? And what is the escalation path? Hopefully it doesn't get to that, but if it does, you'll be prepared for that.
Yeah, I agree with Sue. That's certainly happened, or I've witnessed it happen. Both of those things. I've both witnessed it and it's happened to me as well. And the thing is to don't be surprised by it. I don't think, I think it's biblical that we shouldn't be surprised when that does happen. We should expect it. Jesus warned us that it would happen. I think how you respond to it, as you said, is really the important part. And so it's always a difficult conversation, but I always recommend having a conversation, having as if at all possible, if the other person is open to it, having a one-on-one conversation, trying to create a safe space where you are there to just basically to learn and understand, like, why did that person do this, what is it that they're thinking, what's the story that they're telling themselves. And I can think of one particular person where I had that difficult conversation. The attack was rather public. um, but when I talked to them one-on-one, what I found was exactly what Sue said. They had been hurt by other Christians in the past, and they had explored faith before, but had left or walked away because of that pain. But they actually still had a curiosity, and they still had a desire to learn, and there's still something in them that was open. um, and that led to, I think, a more healing conversation and a door that opened for me to continue talking to that person even to this day, where it's much more friendly. They still have those, tension. That tension is still there, but it's a much better relationship. And ultimately, like, that's what I have to keep in mind, is my goal isn't to, like, be justified, or for my name to be cleared, or for that person to believe what I believe. Ultimately, I just want to understand, like, what's going on with this person, and how can I, like, address anything that might need to be addressed. Maybe it is something I did. um, and also, like, how can I help this person, how can I serve this person, if nothing else, even if, like, that doesn't work, and, like, there is no resolution, there's no reconciliation. If nothing else, then I have a better sense of maybe how I can pray for that person, and I can trust God to do the work.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that those are some very practical and also very useful things that we really may be approaching and experiencing in the workplace. So thank you. Well, that's actually all the time we have for Q&A today. I know that some of you may have other questions. I encourage you to continue to interact on socials about this, on Go Live Serve socials, or Called to Work and Theology of Work. I also encourage you to email us questions, and we use your questions to make future webinar topics. So I encourage you to please send those. I do see a couple questions coming through about the practicalities of setting up employee resource groups. I encourage you to take a look at Theology of Work's website. I know they have some tools for that, and also just a general search online. There's actually several websites that go through step-by-step how to do that. It's just beyond the scope of today's webinar. So with that, I would like to ask Mimi to lead us in a closing prayer, and then I have a few quick announcements.
Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you, Lord, for every person that you brought here, and the heart that you've put into them to reach others for you, for Jesus, to share about their faith openly, Lord. I just pray that you give them each just one opportunity this week to use one of the things that they learned today, in order to share about what they believe, Lord, that it will bring light into a secular workplace, Lord, that it will shine who you are, Lord, to people who believe and don't believe, God, that you will help make us more curious and open, Lord, that when we try to go and make disciples, that it not be about us, Lord, but that it be about you and about how we can love and serve on other people, God. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share what you've been doing, Lord, the revival that you're bringing to all of our different workplaces. And we just pray for more and more of your presence, for your Holy Spirit to fill the places where we work, to give us courage, Lord, and strength to work as unto you and to share about who you are, as we live our life as a testimony, as we talk about you in ways that are more and more open, and hopefully full of joy. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you, Mimi, and thank you, Sue. Thank you to all of you for joining us as well. We do invite you to check out the resources you heard about today, including the websites that are listed up there on the screen. And we encourage you to check out the other recordings of the other webinars that you can find on Go Live Serve's YouTube channel. You can also stay updated about upcoming events and webinars by joining our newsletter mailing list. I think there should be a link to do that in the emails that you received. And we also tell you to stay tuned. We will be having more webinars in the future. So thank you again for joining us today, and blessings to you as you glorify God in your work. Have a wonderful day.